crew. So we encourage many more of you to do it next week with us.
Kind of fun. Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to see you and welcome to the Friday Animal Welfare Leadership Roundup call hosted by Maddie's Fund. We have a busy agenda for today with 3 important topics. We have Jackson Galaxy coming on with one of his colleagues who you're going to get to meet to talk about how they're addressing compassion fatigue, but framed a little bit differently, and how you can get you and your staff involved. And then we'll hear from Dr. Pogriva. Dr. Pogriva has been on the call several times talking about COVID. And given the latest variant, she is one of the leading epidemiologists studying COVID. And so given this new variant and what it could mean and how much seems unknown, we wanted to ask her back to give us kind of the first look at what's actually happening with Omicron and what we need to know for our organizations. And then finally, we have Steve Zeidman back from Pet Health. And there's been some really concerning data trends that we've been seeing, in his latest blog showed some things that we need to be thinking about and trying to mitigate for, because it seems that outcomes are slowing down and some other things. So he'll be here to talk about that, but also to hear from you about what's happening in your shelter. So that's our agenda for today. But before we get into that, I want to turn it over to Mary Smith from Maddie's Fund.
Thanks, Kristin. Thanks, Bobby. It's really awesome to be here. And I know we have a lot on the agenda, so I'll be quick. This is the 22nd month that we have been doing this, coming together initially to share our fears related to COVID, figuring out what the solutions would be like, sometimes on a 15-minute basis. And they've really morphed into an opportunity for us to come together and realize that we don't have to do this by ourselves, that there is a larger community that we can be part of. And maybe taking a page from Dr. P's book, maybe the word next year for us will be collaboration, as we start to think about ways that we all can work together with other groups, other people within our community. But I'm really interested in hearing from you, because we definitely, and this is so funny because Kristin and Bobby are just like, what is she talking about? But we don't have any plans to stop doing these calls. We really think that they are important, and we would love to hear from you all as to what you think we might be able to do going forward. For example, my dear, wonderful colleague, Shelley Thompson, continues to remind us that if we want to be inclusive for groups all across the United States, we are really making it impossible for people that are in Hawaii to do these calls, because we start at, what time is it? 8 o'clock. So it's possible that we would consider changing the times. Other people have, made suggestions. I'd like to hear from you guys if you have suggestions of ways that we can maybe alter the format in some way, or just really to hear from you. You guys are like this amazing focus group for us to take advantage of. And I would love to hear from you if you want to join me in the forum and share your ideas, or just email them to any of us. My email is, I know this is really hard, smith@maddiesfund.org. And even if you get that wrong, it'll eventually come to me, thanks to the great grants team we have monitoring those things. Also, I think that there will probably be some surprises that we'll be able to talk about next year. See, love to keep you on the hook with that one. So you'll have to keep engaged so you can find out what those things might be as we go forward. But we really love seeing you all every Friday. It's so cool. I mean, where else on the planet can I start the day with the potential for using my favorite curse words? I mean, come on, you have so indulged me these 22 months. I am forever grateful for that. So thank you all. I hope you have a really wonderful holiday. And again, we've come through 22 months of all of this craziness, and the way we've done it is with each of us together. So thank you all. I'm out.
Thank you so much, Mary. And just to remind you, we also have a form. We are asking for suggestions, and a lot of you have made suggestions about people you would like to see talk on the call. Bobby, can you post a link to that form again? Thanks. And we're getting a lot of great ideas. Next week's going to be really exciting. We have Dr. Sagerson coming and Jim Crosby coming to talk about a new way to record bites. And this is going to be potentially really significant. And it's sort of a Dunbar skill 2.0. Actually, Ian Dunbar was involved in the process of creating it, but it's actually a visual way to record bites and to contextualize them, which is something that we've never had before. And it's time, it is with the University of Florida going through a validation process, and it's time to have you all start using it. And so we hope you can come next week for that because it's hopefully going to be a hugely useful tool to all of you who do deal with dog bites, and hopefully really change how we think about dog bites rather than just a 1 to 6 scale, looking at a more nuanced view of dog bites. So that is next week. So we hope you can join us. And we have lots of new exciting topics coming up in the next couple of months. And we need your suggestions too, particularly if they are authors of research projects, papers, books that you want to see speak. We can usually talk people into coming if you tell us who you'd like to see. Bobby and I go do the work of tracking them down and getting them on the call. So just let us know and think big when you submit that form. And of course, head to the forum too to talk more about other ways you'd like to see these calls evolve. We are going to now turn it over to our partners from national organizations to make any announcements that you have today for us. And as always, just jump on in.
Kristin, I'll jump on first. Best Friends has just kicked off our weekly town hall series on Thursdays at 5 o'clock Central Time, which seemed to be a good time for as many people as possible. And really excited about it this week because I think once you hear what Steve has to say, I think I know what Steve's going to talk about. But when you get a chance to listen to Steve, you'll find out why this topic is so important. But this coming Thursday on December 9th, we're going to have Dr. Kate Hurley's presentation. So she presented this at the Best Friends Conference, which is virtual this year. We are taking that recording and replaying it as a part of the town hall this coming week, and it's on reducing length of stay at your shelter. And it is one of my favorite presentations. I've seen her give this 2 or 3 different times now, and it's one of my favorite presentations I've ever heard at any conference anywhere. And so I highly recommend you be there and attend it. And once you hear Steve talk about the challenges that we're seeing out there, I think you'll even more want to attend. So that's it.
Hey everybody, it's Kathy from Canada. So Humane Canada's Summit for Animals is happening in May next year, 2022, and it's going to be a hybrid event. It's going to run all through the month of May, but we're doing in person. Woohoo! 2 days, May 12 and 13 at the Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel in Banff, Alberta, beautiful Banff. And shh, don't tell the programming committee I told you this. But the 2-day in-person event, the main theme is going to be community sheltering. See you there.
Good morning, everyone. Not a national group, but my name's Joe Stafford, and I just wanted to let everyone know that myself and Maddie Martinez from the County Los Angeles Department of Animal Care and Control will be hosting the Field Services Job Alike. It's going to kick off next Wednesday, December 8th. It'll be at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. I'm really hoping during this first meeting, we'll be able to gather some information on how we can best serve the field services community into 2022. If you have field services staff that work in your organization or organizations that you work with, I would really appreciate you encouraging them to jump on and give us some insight on how we can make that program successful. After the initial meeting on December 8th, we'll get started in January, and the reoccurring meetings will be the 1st, and third Wednesday, right now slated for 1 o'clock Central Standard Time. So if you could get that out to your networks, I sure would appreciate it. And if you're not field services, but would like to join us, you're more than welcome. And I think Bobby's gonna drop the link in the chat for the registration for that. Thank you all so much. And please keep these meetings. They have been my rock and my center. I cannot imagine these going away.
Hey everyone, it's Kim Album with Bissell Pet Foundation. We are starting an Empty the Shelters next week. We're super excited. I just want to remind you all that it's happening. And if you're not participating and you would like to participate, it's not too late. Just zip me an email and we can hook you up.
Hey y'all, it's Stacy with the Community Cats Podcast. Tomorrow I have my Trapper Certification Workshop at 2 p.m. So trappers, folks can learn how to trap cats safely. If you're not familiar with that program, I do them monthly. We've had over 2,000 folks receive certifications this year on how to trap community cats. We also have fun cat trivia, and we have these new Stay Feral t-shirts. So they're going to be some lucky winners of that. And then I just want to point out a website to check out, unitedspayalliance.org. I'm on their board of directors, and we have enlisted a huge crowd of volunteers to go through state by state, updating the lists for spay-neuter resources. And our goal is to try and keep those spay-neuter resources updated. We've had folks from AARP volunteer with us, folks from a high school group of kids from a high school volunteered with us. We have a real range of different volunteers, but our goal, we're working to make sure that we have up-to-date information for all of the states in the United States by first part of the year. So, and it's going well. So folks, check out unitedspayalliance.org, and I'm really excited to make sure that information is kept current with the grassroots interest.
Courtney Cunningham over here from Petco Love. I wanted to jump in and remind you guys that we have our 1 million vaccine campaign program that we're super pumped about. And we've opened it up to any organization that is a 501c3 and would be administering these themselves to publicly owned pets. If you do have any questions, you can always email us at partners@petcolove.org. And I'll put that also in the chat. So if you have any questions, or if you have any organizations that you know of in your community that would benefit from this program, that'd be awesome. And not only are the vaccines free, but they get a $3 stipend for each one that they do administer, which is pretty awesome. So again, thank you guys so much for letting me casually. Yes, we will be joining later on. Thanks for putting that in there, Bobby, man. Appreciate it.
We're going to remind you of this at the end of the call and in email, but can you, Stacy, can you hold up that shirt again so we can see it? It looks really adorable. If you're
Yep, I'm here.
cool, we want a better look at that shirt. That is so cute. So this is a good lead into next week. We're asking everybody to wear your favorite animal welfare t-shirt. So it is some version of Fancy Friday, but wear an animal welfare t-shirt next week, because a lot of folks are looking for holiday gifts, and there's some really cute animal welfare t-shirts out there. So what we'll do next week is ask everybody to wear their favorite or bring it. And you can post links if there's places to buy them. So if folks want to buy, I know all my mom wants is animal shelter t-shirts for whatever reason. So if you want to get those for gifts, this is a great time to find the cutest ones out there. So please wear them next week. And we will remind you again. Let's see. Okay, Jackson is here. So we are going to start. We have cat camp counselors Jackson Galaxy and Stephanie Rogers here to talk about a really important subject. And you may recall that a few weeks ago we were talking about bullying and compassion fatigue and the kind of trauma exposure that animal welfare workers are dealing with right now. And it so happened that Jackson reached out about a program that they're working on. And so he is here today along with Stephanie Rogers to talk a little bit about what they're up to and how you can get involved. So welcome.
Thanks, Kristin. Thank you for having me again here. Really, as always. honored to talk to you guys. And I'm really, really excited to be presenting this cat camp session. Just a little bit of background. Stephanie Rogers, who you'll meet in a second, and I met about a year ago when we wanted to create a cat camp session when we launched our first virtual cat camp about grief. And especially now, from sort of a global standpoint, there's sort of that underlying hum of grief, I think that everyone feels to a certain degree, but whether folks had lost an animal companion during the pandemic or any other time, we just felt like we wanted to have a space for them to be and a way to offer them guidance and tools through what they were experiencing. So I got to meet Stephanie. She came in and did the session with me. It was really successful. We've done now, I guess, 3 of them, and we're doing our 4th weekend this weekend. And as it started to snowball and more people were showing up, we realized that we had sort of tapped into something. And of course, what we wanted to do in Cat Camp, and what, of course, I really wanted to do because of my history in welfare, was to offer that space to people who work in the animal field. And so we've talked to Kristin about what we really wanted to cover. And as we've been talking, all kinds of stuff has been coming up. Stuff that was coming up for me, you know, having entered the shelter world in the early 90s, and what that looked like and what we had to deal with back then, and how I've sort of carried that with me, that culture around euthanasia that I still carry with me. And so the process of us talking this out has been just revelatory to me, just a personal level. And I'm hoping that that's something that we're going to be able to offer anyone who shows up. And at the very least, we've said before, it's a safe space. And it's also kind of nice that you're not sitting in an actual room, because if you don't want your face shown, if you don't want to speak, if you just want to be there, that's what you can do through the miracle of Zoom. But I think that we're going to be covering things that if it resonates the way it did with me, I think it's going to be a really powerful thing for folks who attend, is my hope. And that's, of course, why we're talking with everybody here today, is just to make sure that we're inviting as many people as possible to attend. Anyway, I wanted to pass it to Stephanie, because I know that as she's been putting this together, she's also had a lot of revelations. So I just wanted to hand it off to her.
Thank you, Jackson. Thank you, Kristin, for inviting us. And thank you, everyone, for all the work that you do every day. Just a little short background on me. I've been a grief counselor and death educator for just almost 18 years now. And in the last 5 years, I have spent almost exclusively in the world of animal companion loss. The recent conversation that Jackson and I had with Kristin has really been very eye-opening to me. I've never been involved in rescue and in animal service from that realm. And I just feel very strongly that I want to find a way to help all of you, to support all of you, maybe in an aspect that you've not had an opportunity to find support. And that is in the grief that you experience as a result of the work you do every day. we'll be talking about a number of things on Sunday, but I think the one thing that I would like to introduce to you just right now as a thought, and maybe something to consider about joining us on Sunday, is that the grief that all of you experienced is actually something called disenfranchised grief. And disenfranchised grief is the grief that arises from a disenfranchised loss. Now, disenfranchised loss is a loss that is not readily acknowledged or even recognized by society at large. So certainly the loss of an animal companion, whether it's within an individual or its group, is one of the most disenfranchised losses that there is. And that adds to the isolation, the sense of separateness from community. And it's kind of like the foundation of all the grief work that's associated with animal loss. So Jackson, feel free to jump in at any time. I don't want to just, I can start going and not shut up. And I don't want to run us over our time.
No, it's all good. I mean, I wanted to add in that when Stephanie and I first met, and it was just sort of an interview type of thing where we got on a Zoom and started talking about what I wanted for this session. And the first time that Stephanie used those two words, disenfranchised grief, I started to actually weep in that moment, because that's anybody who has worked with animals as long as a lot of us have, it is that. It is knowing that many in the world outside of this don't consider it something worth the suffering that might be that comes with it, and so it's something that you hold in because you assume that everyone's going to be like, well, aren't you over it yet? I mean, are you done? And they would never say that about a human. And once we get into that from an organizational perspective, I think it becomes, for me, it became after 30 years, all of a sudden I started questioning how I approached it for all the years that I was in my shelter. So it was pretty, like I said, revelatory and heavy at the same time. But yeah, no, anyway, no, Stephanie, you can go. And Kristin, just, you got to cut us off whenever you feel.
Well, I don't want to, I'm hoping actually this is the beginning of a longer conversation, and I'd love to have you both back for a whole hour at some point, because I think, Stephanie, we talked about that terminology, but we also talked about how little the term compassion fatigue does to describe what we're dealing with, the level of trauma we're dealing with every day. And I think I can speak for this group to say we're all struggling with it, because it feels like we don't have the language and we don't have the ability to really even frame what is happening to ourselves and our workers. And I'm hoping that you can help us both as we kind of move forward in this conversation. And I don't know, Stephanie, if you want to say anything about kind of our conversation and what sort of how animal welfare might consider differently how we're approaching what we're going through.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a real issue with the term compassion fatigue. I have had since the first time I heard it years and years ago, because to me, it implies judgment. It's certainly self-judgment. It says that we're lacking in something, that we started out good, compassionate people, and somewhere along the way, we just got tired of it. And I don't believe, so there's that judgmental aspect of it. I also don't believe that it begins to address what for all of you is very much a level of trauma that you live with every day. And it's been my experience that, and I saw this in human hospice as well, but it's really true in animal service, that the thick skin that we put on in order to do the work that we do every day, and you especially, is actually suffocating and stifling us. And I'm not for a minute saying that we have that you shouldn't have a thick skin, that it's not necessary. I know that it is, but I think it needs to be redefined, redrawn as something that's removable. And in order to do that within organizations, it's necessary that we create and build in a safe space in which to take off that skin. I personally believe that's the power of ritual, a very simple ritual that can be done on a regular basis, like once a month, where you actually remove that thick skin and acknowledge the trauma, the overwhelm that you feel and experience on a daily basis. Because if you live in that thick skin all the time, around each other all the time, what you wind up doing is disenfranchising yourself. Society disenfranchises not just your loss, but your work to a great extent. I know you all know that. You become invisible, and except when you're needed. And then whatever you're needed for, you don't do fast enough, or you don't provide in the right way, or you don't. There's always lots of people judging and nobody really acknowledging and honoring. Well, not nobody, but on a grand scale, on a societal scale, very few people acknowledging what you do and who you are. So when you put on the thick skin to be able to do what you do, and you push down the pain and the fear, and there's been a lot of fear come up in the past 2 years, especially. And we push that down the same way that society pushes that down for you, then you wind up disenfranchising yourself. So what I would really like to do is help you discover ways within your organization and as individuals to allow yourself to honor yourself and each other, including the fear, the sadness, the trauma, and all the ugly crying side of that, that is not something that's normally available to you. And as I understand it, it's not a framework that exists in your work as it is. And all of that, whatever it is, it has to be based on self-compassion. I believe
Stephanie,
that.
I'm so sorry, but I'm starting to get aware of the fact that we're cutting into time, and we're going to go through all of it. But no, we're going to go through all of this. Let me just answer, Julie. I just saw your question. It's going to be a 90-minute session, and that will be on Sunday at 5 o'clock Eastern. Yes. And you can go to catcamp.com to sign up. The other thing I was going to say, which was, Jackson, what? Nothing.
I'm going to tell you what I want you to say is that we got to do one of these, or many of them, for our own staff and our own workers. And so I hope today's the beginning of really thinking about that, because I know I can think of so many staff who would just it would be so beneficial for them to get this. So we are excited about Sunday and about, I think, what could come beyond that. And so really want this to be kind of the opening of a conversation and something we can all think through about how could we offer this kind of discussion to the people who need it the most.
And we will definitely, and Kristin, you and I have talked about this separately, that Stephanie and I will open ourselves up to do this on an organization by organization basis if you want us, and we can help tailor it to the individual places.
This is amazing. Okay, we do have to change. Stephanie, Jackson, thank you so much for being here. And it is just it makes me want to cry too, just hearing you talk about this. And it's really healing, I think, just to hear the different framings. So thank you. We're going to move on to Kristin Pogriva Brown, who is here to talk about COVID, a very different topic, but one that is equally concerning. Kristin, are you with us? I'm looking for you on the
I'm
screen.
here.
Hi. Thank you so much. You always come back when it looks like the SHIT is going to hit the fan with COVID. So here you are. And what is this Omicron thing? Well, first of all, not everyone knows you. And so I guess, could you start by telling us who you are, and then tell us a little bit about what we need to know?
Sure. So good morning, everyone. My name's Kristin. I am an infectious disease epidemiologist. I'm a faculty member at the University of Arizona. And I'm also a animal welfare fan member, or ally, I guess is maybe a better word. Because before COVID, I did a lot of work with One Health, which looks at the interaction between humans, animals, and the environment. And so and work with our local animal shelter. So I'm so in awe of the work you guys do. And so anything, when Kristin asked me any help that I can provide, I'm happy to give. So that being said, we've obviously been pretty busy we're coming up on 2 years for the pandemic, and lots of changes and kind of ups and downs across the country. We have variations with response, variations with case rates. I am in Arizona, where we have the dubious distinction of being #1 in the world for transmission multiple times. We have twice the death rate of other states that are comparable to us. So we are definitely in the thick of things. So Kristin sent me an email and asked if I could give you guys a quick overview of Omicron, and I'm gonna I can share my screen. Let me just pull this up. So I put this together so I could, let's see. Oh, no, I guess I have to share my screen first. You'd think after 2 years of Zoom, we'd be better at this, but let's see. So I went through and tried to pull the latest information, and then literally when I woke up this morning, it was things had been updated again. So what I'm going to, I guess the takeaway from this is that things are changing very rapidly, and so but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we know and what we don't know, and kind of what we can do about it in the interim. Let's see. Okay, so it's obviously been in the news a lot lately. And I guess the first question for people who aren't in public health is kind of, why are scientists and governments seemingly freaking out with this? Well, the first is kind of an adage that we in public health adhere to, which is a pandemic anywhere is a pandemic everywhere. And we need to remember that until we get this under control in all parts of the world, we're always going to have some level of risk. But the biggest reason that this particular variant is causing such consternation is that the genomic surveillance that picked this up in South Africa, our genomic surveillance across the world it's good, but not great. And there's a definite time delay. And we knew that once they realized what they had, the likelihood that it had already spread was really high. The reason it's concerning is that we have a lot of concern about immune escape, and I'm going to go into that in the next slide. And the idea would be that if this variant or another variant basically made it so that our vaccines are useless, we're going to be like starting all over again, and none of us wants that. The other concern is that because of the mutations that it has, it might actually be able to evade some of the testing targets that we have, which would have a huge impact on surveillance. So this mutation, it's a mutation of the Delta variant. It was first identified in South Africa on November 11th, and then they announced it on the 26th, I believe, along with WHO, but they were doing work during that time period. The reason this is concerning is this particular variant has over 50 mutations, 35, I believe, of which are actually on the spike protein. But it's not just the number of mutations, it's kind of the type of mutations that we're seeing. And what that means is that genomically, and this is where it's important to indicate, genomically, it indicates that the spike proteins could be mutated in such a way that it attaches to human cells easier. And it could impact, there's 3 different types of antibody cells, and it could affect one of those types, making our antibodies less effective. So whether or not you've had a vaccine or whether or not you've had a previous infection, it could impact your immunity. It also could have an impact on where we use PCR to detect some of these viruses, and the PCR looks for a certain protein on the outside of the virus, and if that protein is mutated, then it won't be able to see them. And that's what happened in South Africa early on, and that's why they were so concerned about what they were seeing. So last night at 10:30 at night when I put this together, it was in 25 plus countries. When I woke up this morning, I think I heard at least another 3 or 4 countries had already reported evidence of this. So this follows a fairly similar pattern to what we saw with Delta, where it started in India, and within a few months, Delta now makes up about 99% of the infections in the US. So when you have something that's just, it outcompetes the other viruses, and that's essentially what's happening. So what can we do to mitigate? I think I skipped, no, well, let me do, okay, I'm gonna skip this and then I'll go back. So what don't we know? Is it more infectious than Delta? Maybe, and it probably is, given the transmission that we're seeing and how quickly it is moving across the globe. It looks like it is moving faster than Delta did, but certainly it's taking over in some of those areas. Will it make you sicker or lead to more deaths? This is the real big unknown, and we won't know this for another couple of weeks probably. There have been reports that it's led to relatively mild illness in people, but we don't know how things like vaccine status, previous infections, age, and other comorbidities may play a role in that. We also have this number from a very small number of case reports, and once things actually get into a population, that's where you really start to see where it happens. So I would say best case scenario, this becomes a variant that is more transmissible, but far more mild than what we've seen. That would be kind of the best thing that could ever happen for our pandemic, because if we essentially all end up with common colds again, I'm not holding out on that, but that would be great. Is your vaccine and booster going to be protective? Again, we hope so, but we don't know. And the problem, again, as I mentioned, is that the mutations that we saw look like they could have an impact on immunity. And then the last one is the travel restrictions going to keep it out of the US? No, it's already here. In fact, this morning when we saw it, it's already been reported in about 10 states. And I actually think that unfortunately it might be having a little bit of the opposite effect, where it's a little bit of a shooting the messenger kind of response. And so I think we need to rethink how we're doing those. It can buy us time if it's done well, but I think it might have been a little late. So what can you do to mitigate the risk? Same things we've always been doing. So get vaccinated. If you are vaccinated, get boosted. So yes, we see breakthrough infections with Delta and potentially with Omicron, but despite how much we hear about vaccine infections, it's still only about 5% of people who've been vaccinated have tested positive for COVID. It's probably a little higher than that because of surveillance and other things, but your vaccines are still working. And so it's really important to kind of not get too much down the fatalist rabbit hole of and just focus on getting what you can do. It also really, really greatly reduces your chances of ending up in the hospital or getting really, really sick. I work with a lot of ED and ICU docs, and they're still telling me that the vast, vast majority of the people they see are unvaccinated. So the people who are getting really sick are not the ones who are vaccinated, especially if you have, if you're not immunocompromised, if you not have other issues, then the vaccine is really the best way to keep you out of the hospital. The other thing is to remember that more transmission leads to more variants. So the better we can do to keep our transmission down, the better. And having a vaccine means you are less likely to transmit the disease. A study just came out actually of the NBA of all places, because they did extensive testing amongst their people and showed that people who are vaccinated they clear the virus out of their system much quicker than people who are unvaccinated, which means you are less likely to transmit. And if you have a question about boosters, I would suggest getting one. I got one. Immunity wanes. That's the way the immune system works. So getting a booster shot will just kind of give your immune system that extra boost that it's needed. And it's really not uncommon to have vaccines where you have a 3-dose vaccine, right? A lot of the childhood vaccines are 3 doses. So I think people, think that, we hear about it and it sounds like it's an unusual thing, but if you go back and look at the vaccines you got as a kid, very likely you had 2 and 3 boosters with those vaccines. And this is just my little soapbox issue. Wear a mask. I always say people have to wear pants to the store, and we somehow manage to keep our civil liberties. So wear a mask. It's not, it does help reduce transmission. It helps reduce, the chances of getting yourself sick or someone else sick, especially if you're indoors and around people you don't know. And then the also option is just to stay home with your pets, which I would be a proponent of too. So this is one of the, this is an article from Science that I pulled some of this information from. And this is more of a layperson's read. So it's doesn't have some of the original genomics, but it's a good source of information. And so hopefully our holidays will be, less COVID, but it's always good to make sure you're doing your best to kind of be thoughtful about these things. So I will stop sharing now.
Kristin, you're so awesome. Yeah. This is really helpful because we just blasted with news. So tell us the reputable news sources we should be looking at.
So that particular one was from Science. So and it's the scientific magazine. I would also say most of those news articles give you links to some of the original scientific studies, and sometimes you can follow those. But that one, I'll send you I already sent you the slides, Kristin, so we can put it in the chat.
Great. Thank you so much. Kristin, we have another topic to get to, so we don't have a ton of time for questions, but I know there's a couple if you could answer in the chat. And as always, thank you for all the work you're doing. I can't imagine how much COVID fatigue you must have, given that your entire life has been redirected, but we really appreciate you making the time to be on these calls and keeping us informed. We're often responsible for hundreds of people's well-being. And so I think what I'm hearing is that masking indoors is really important right now. Again, even though a lot of folks have stopped that, is that your biggest advice, is to wear masks indoors and not to kind of go back on that?
Yeah, I get it. People get tired of doing it. But I do think that through the holidays, we're already seeing an increase because of Delta, at least in Arizona and nationally, we're seeing an increase in cases. And then with Omicron, we're going to see more cases. So I would suggest continuing to wear your masks and have your staff wear their masks indoors. And just, it's like we managed to make that work, using masks and social distancing and all these things, we managed to get to some tiny level of norm even before our vaccines. And so we know it works, and it's a simple fix. So I guess my thought is, why not keep doing it? And I can answer some of the questions over chat, even if you guys need to move on to another topic.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. And Hopefully there will be a day when we can say we haven't seen Dr. Pogriva in a long time. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to Steve Zeidman is here. It took us a couple of weeks to get him because he's a very busy person, and we kept him at the end of the agenda on purpose because we all know you're on pins and needles to hear what is happening with shelter data, and some weird things are happening that we need to pay attention to. So Steve, thank you again so much for making the time to be here. And I just want to say to everybody, we may go a few minutes over today, just a couple of minutes over. If we run out of time, and this is recorded, so if you do have to leave, you'll be able to see the recording later. But Steve, over to you.
All right, there we go. All right, sorry about that. It's like, you know, you try to have all your screens open and then you forget that one thing about unmuting. All right. Yeah, so I am happy to present. The one thing I'm going to say is I am going to present this with November data. So I'm always conscious that when I say this data is 3 days old, the way we collect data from Pet Health is it is collected daily. So we actually do always have the data this early. But here's the thing, you guys don't do everything real time, which drives me insane. So the data starts to change within a couple of weeks as it gets live. So I wouldn't call this the published data of November, but to be honest with you, it doesn't change dramatically enough for us to see trends. So I thought, why not, since it's November, it's December already, let's look at November data. So that will be in the report. Yeah, and then anyone who's read my blog, I'm going to sort of go backwards because, you know, the blog starts with the big story and then works its way down. I'm going to build up to it. So for those who were expecting it in the same order that I wrote the blog, now I got to switch screens again and make sure. Okay, so let's just talk about intake. So when you look at the intake, it looks incredibly unremarkable. When you look at our overall intake with dogs, we have been trending for the last 3 months exactly where we were last year. And we had been moving towards that trend really all along, and we are nowhere near 2019 data. You look at this alone, you would say, wow, we're in awesome shape, right? And you look at cat, again, it looks awesome. It looks like we're doing fantastic, right? You look at basic intake data from all look of things, everything looks fantastic. And so I remember when this trend started happening and people said their shelters were filling up, we're like, I don't know where that's
Steve, excuse me, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but people are not seeing your screen. Have you shared your screen?
Yes, I have. And if you don't see it, then that's a problem. All right. Sorry, that
Let's
is
just take
really
a
a
minute
problem.
because it's such interesting information.
Yes, that is really, really a problem. Hold on. I could have sworn I did it right. Hold on. Let me pull this back up. Here. Share my screen. Screen 2. Share. I didn't push the extra button. Now I'm sharing. Now do you guys see this data?
Yes, thank
All
you
right,
so
good.
much.
Okay. I forgot to push one more extra button. All right, now this makes a lot more sense. So I'll give you guys a chance to look at this. This is the intake data over the last few years, and particularly for those who, when I wrote my blog, that was September data. So because there was that delay, I now actually have 2 extra months of data in here, and you can see we very much, from a pure overall intake perspective, you look at it and you think, wow, things are looking awesome. And then and everyone who's working the shelter goes, oh, I have no idea then what's going on in my shelter. So now I gotta switch back to the screen so that I can progress my slides. All right, so then when we look at data, why is our numbers at 2020 levels? Now I can tell you that overall, and I'll kind of talk about how you guys could take a look at this data on your own and play around with it at the end. But the biggest reason why it hasn't started, it doesn't look like it's returning to 2019 levels at all, is because of intake. I mean, because of transfer. We are trending substantially below the numbers we had in 2019 and 2020. So we are not moving animals to shelter around in our shelters. So the transfer out numbers are going to look almost identical to this. This is really the biggest impact we have is we are not moving animals around. And we know how important that is to our overall success as an industry. So you may say, then how does that affect our outcomes? Well, our adoptions are down, not terribly, but down. But if you think about the amount of intake is down from 2019, you would expect different numbers. So adoptions are down for both dog and cat, but not significantly. And then you look at euthanasia, and euthanasia is telling us, okay, it's not anywhere near where 2019 levels are, but we are running high for dogs than we were to 2020. If our intake levels are at 2020 numbers, which is the red number, our euthanasia number is quite a bit significantly higher. And then with cats, they're right on 2020 numbers. So this is what I was building up to. So, and this is why Brent knows what I'm going to talk about. It was because it was his idea to come up with this new report. This new report is average days. At the end of each month, we look at the number, how long has those animals been in the shelters. I want to make sure I define this report because it's a little tricky. Length of stay measures only animals that have actually left the shelter, right? Because you have to have a start date and an end date for length of stay. This report is measuring animals that are currently in the building on the end of the month. How long have they been there? And this is the scary report. Yes, our shelters are full. They're full because we are not moving animals. These are the same animals that are there in August, September, October, and November. Our shelters are full, and they are fuller than they've ever been in our history because they're not moving. And this is where it's really important to me is, especially I get all the calls from the media all the time about this, and they want to blame the public. What is the public doing wrong that's causing shelters to be filled up? Let's make it clear right now, the public's not doing anything wrong, right? Maybe they could adopt more. Maybe there's some things that we could do to have them help us. But we have all these animals. Now the question is how do we solve for it, right? I mean, that's the big question, because this is the scary point. At some point, these animals are, whether or not a shelter has a euthanasia for space policy or not, eventually these animals are going to get sick if they're in their care. Now, granted, we have more animals. I don't have the slide, and I could always pull it up on the data. We have a lot more animals in foster than we've ever had before. That helps, but it's also not a permanent solution, right? We can't foster our way out of this. Ultimately, we need to find permanent homes for all these animals. And that's really the takeaway here. The interesting thing about cats is, you might say, oh, it doesn't look as bad as dog. But remember, this is supposed to be our quiet period. This is before the storm. If you look at the trend line for the last 2 years, we slowly build up that population because we know when the spring comes, we're going to have to move. We're going to have to move, the kittens really fast. Having that trajectory of the cats is just as concerning as the dogs, because we know the spring tidal wave that we get every year. So this is the big takeaway, and I don't have any additional slides from here. I'm happy what I actually did, because it said that we want to have a broader conversation and say if people have questions. I actually have we have a new data dashboard that allows you to play with the data yourself and look at this year's data versus last year's data. And I also have the tool that I use to create my reports. I have them all standing by so I can answer questions people have, and we could actually generate data on the fly. But that's really the sort of the main story and the main thing I wanted to leave us with, and then just throw that out to you guys to start a discussion.
Okay, so I guess Brent, do you want to kind of talk about your, really quick before we lose folks, about the town hall you have coming up?
Yeah, I'm going to replug that because it's a presentation that Dr. Levy's given multiple times that I think is amazing. If you haven't heard her give it, or if you have, it's on reducing length of stay at your shelter. And it's one of the best presentations I've ever seen anywhere, which will help address some of the challenges that we're seeing here. And it's only a mild coincidence that Steve is here and that this is scheduled for that next week.
Even though it was Brent's idea to create the report that we created. Now, granted, it took me several months to get that report created.
I've been begging him since.
His idea.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
But it's great. It's definitely serving the industry well to have that.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Steve,
and it was.
Are you feeling, you're usually pretty calm about things? Does this, I mean, this just makes me very anxious. Are you sort of having the oh crap moment that some of us
I'll tell you, September, I was having an oh crap moment because I felt like it was about to crest. The interesting thing is when you go back and you look at the intake, the fact that adoption and euthanasia are still somewhat stable tells me that we're figuring it out. We're not having, I thought for sure that by this point we would start seeing euthanasia to really jump. It's a positive, obviously, that we've not seen euthanasia jump yet at this point. But it does scare me that are we either prolonging the inevitable, or are we not, because the higher that goes, something's going to have to give, right? And this is all, we know that this is not really probably being driven by COVID. This isn't the COVID thing. We believe from when we talk to shelters, this is a staffing issue. This is all about staffing. And I could tell you, I think you follow anything around the economy, the staffing issue isn't a short-term issue. I think that even all of our business models of how we even employ our employees is going to have to change. When you could get a much better job at McDonald's, it's going to be a very different model, right? For how do we support our mission? Because I think the reason transfers aren't happening is because shelters can't take any more animals.
But
And
I
I think
mean,
that's a big deal.
I just want, in our last few minutes, I want to say that there's plenty of shelters that are virtually empty right now. Like, we see that every day just by looking at public listings of adoptions. Like, I think there's a risk aversion to taking transfers in, and that does not necessarily seem to correlate with whether a shelter is full or empty. Is that wrong?
Well, I think it's a capacity for care that's not empty. That could be empty, right? I heard from a shelter in the Midwest that I knew would take in hundreds of animals, probably on a monthly basis, that had said they stopped their transfer program because morale in their shelter is so low, because they're operating at 50% of the staffing that they're budgeted to handle. So they've stopped taking transfers because they can't stop taking from their local public, right? So when you do that, and especially, again, we could have a whole conversation about transfers and are we taking the right animals, are we moving the right animals? When that many animals are not moving, it means the adoptions don't happen in the communities who are taking the animals, but it also means that they're, for lack of a better word, being warehoused in the shelters that don't have the community resources to place the animals directly. So that's where that because we're not redistributing the animals, we're having exactly that effect. Is either shelters are just reducing their capacity because of the lack of staff, or you have where they're overwhelmed with animals, and you've got huge issues of compassion. I was going to use the word compassion fatigue, but I'll hold it back. But just the overwhelmness, and in both cases, you know what we're in. This is just what I'm hearing when I talk to shelters. I have no data to back it up, and I always like data. Is just that's overwhelmingly the issues faced. You know, the internal struggle around staffing is causing this, and it's different depending on the community or the shelter, I should say. Some are just reducing their capacity dramatically, and some are just trying to make do and are still taking in animals.
I guess, Steve, the question I would ask you is, you know, we wanted to discuss this today, and obviously folks are going to start dropping off. We're at time. If we took this data and had you back and really spent an hour digging in and talking about what to do you sort of have, and Brent, maybe you have thoughts on this too, like, do you think that would be a valuable use of this call time to kind of think collectively about how we're going to address this?
I mean, I certainly think that we need time to hear, like, you know, Steve and I talk about some of this a lot, in that you can see things in the data and we should make data informed decisions, but sometimes what people are seeing at their individual shelters gives us that anecdotal data to create the story around what we're seeing in the data. Like, you know, Steve's not going to be able to see the short staffing in his data. So I think us being able to have some of these conversations and having a broader input of what people are seeing in their own communities would definitely be helpful.
Yeah. And like I said, I have this report. So by the way, what I'm showing on the screen right now is the data dashboard, which if you go to petpoint.com/industry data, you could sign up and you could play around with the data. This is what you can see. And then I would say, if we have a separate meeting, the data that I'm presenting here, I can manipulate that data right here on the screen live. And we could also talk about, so a few things like, oh, I want to know what's going on in this region, or I want to know, if we want, what is the impact on euthanasia here? If we, we could play around with those numbers here if we've got questions, and I'm happy to answer them. And then I'll say that for those who see on the screen is my next blog will be about this. I got bully breed data that I'm going to share in my next blog. And now that I said it publicly, I have to get it written. So I've got some data on comparing.
Is the story even more terrifying?
Okay, I'll give you my super cliff notes as someone that says, surprisingly, it is. A lot of times we like to blame all of the dog issues on bully breeds. It's not. I'm going to say, and then now I have to figure out how my blog is going to write. It feels a lot like the black cat situation, where we used to like to blame black cats don't get adopted, but we just have a lot of them. And it's the same with, I have a feeling that the trends were not as significantly different between bully and non-bully breeds that I was expecting. But we do have a lot of them, that's for sure. So.
Okay, well, I guess what Steve and Brent and a couple of others, I think Shelter Animals Count too needs to be in this conversation, but maybe we can think about in early January dedicating some time to really talking through some of this stuff with this group.
Yeah, and we'll have we could then look at the 3 years, complete of the data and see where we're at. But it is interesting because, I used to think that 2021 wasn't going to be so interesting, but boy, it's been crazy.
Well, thank you all so much. Don't forget to wear your t-shirts next week. We're going to have a happy, exciting call. I know this was another heavy one. But next week we start out with bites, but we'll go up from there, I promise, in terms of the joy. The holidays are getting close, so please be there next week. You will not want to miss this bite scale. stuff. It's really revolutionary and has so much potential to change things. Wear your t-shirts. We'll send out an email with the agenda early. And thanks so much to everyone for being here. And as always, thanks so much to Maddie's Fund for hosting these, and go find Mary on the forum to talk about what we want the calls to look like in the next year. These are all of our calls. So we're excited to get that agenda going. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you back here next week.